left, I said to Roland, who was working beside me so we could hear the conversation, I said, Tamir's in that really sweet, really brief instant in time where he's got it figured out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I really envy him, but the thing is, we all had that space in our lives for like 6 months or 4 months or 2 years where we thought we could dictate the terms of our life, or we thought we got it all figured out, and then along comes the wrong girl, or along comes your mom gets sick or something. And I said, he's got it all figured out right now, but and it's just just very interesting to hear you speaking now, and you've sort of realized you can do your half and then you cross your fingers for the rest. That's how I look at it.
Hello everyone, welcome to Nectar of Time. I'm your host, Tamir Barzilai, and today we're going to be speaking with Tyler Dorchester. Tyler is a good friend of mine. For 7 years, he's also been my barber. Tyler is someone who has a deep well of knowledge when it comes to literature, when it comes to fiction. We are constantly discussing books of all sorts when I'm in his chair. And in a sense, he is a therapist and teacher of sorts when it comes to these topics. And so today I sat down with him and we spoke about many beautiful vignettes of literature, how it's important to synthesize fiction with nonfiction, and how to deal with life's enigmas. So hope you sit down, pour yourself a cup of tea or coffee or whatever you like, and enjoy the next hour and a half. Thank you so much. It's kind of a nice color, eh?
Yeah, it is.
A little amber. Well, we should cheers. Welcome to the Nectar of Time.
Thank you.
Let's see if it tastes like the Nectar of Time.
Mysterious and inevitable. Actually, that's really good.
Cool. Well, where do we begin? I mean, I think a lot of our conversations in terms of all of the topics that I just mentioned, they go in a variety of directions. I sit down in the chair, we talk. I mean, you've come over to my place a bunch of times. We know each other. We know what makes each other tick in terms of these novels, these books, these ideas, these vignettes. And we just share these little vignettes from time to time. And I think maybe I'll just turn the attention quickly to a gift that you gave me from my last birthday, I think. Was it a birthday? It was a birthday gift, right?
Or Christmas.
Or Christmas gift.
It was a birthday. It was
a birthday gift.
It was, yeah.
And it was last year's.
Yep.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to take this book out right here. And it's called Men, Women, and Other Adventures. And there's this how would you describe this cover? Tell me a little bit about the cover.
I think it's a fashion designer from the mid-'60s.
Right.
And he's sort of Rico Suave with these slinky, beautiful women sort of pressing up against him. But they're kind of surrounding him too. They could actually turn on him at any second by the looks of it.
Right. Their eyes are a little bit ominous in some sense. And you don't know if there's they lead you back up to a room and then they have a dagger hidden attached to their thigh, and they take it out and stab you in the back.
Or a little poison pill in their ring.
Or a pill. Yeah, these are potentially the sirens, the red sparrows,
sure.
Whatever you want to call them. And so this is both how did this connect to the book? And let me just say something quickly about the book. This is a book totally made by Tyler as a anthology or compilation of, in every sense of the word, where he would physically take short stories from other anthologies and collections and then put the ones that he thought were most relevant for me inside, and then add little little photos and captions and things like that.
Well, I used to the images.
Dusty.
Yeah, I don't even, I'm sitting here trying to think of where I got the idea to do this. But anyways, yeah, if I read a short story I like, I'll actually take the carpenter knife and take it off of the spine. And I'll bind the stories back together using onion paper, which, sorry God, but it's from the Bible because it's very...
Onion paper, okay.
It's very bendy.
Right.
But strong, so it'll act like book glue. And anyways, yeah, I think I made four different sections for you.
Right, like you
Really.
divided it into segments.
Yeah,
Part
my
one.
my favorite authors:
Uh-huh.
Dangerous Women, Best Ever Nonfiction Ever, Adventures in Maildom, and favorite stories. And then part 6 is Jews and Barbers, because
I really need to get through more of it because like I was saying before we started recording, like I just sort of fell off a bit with my reading for the last 6 months, managing my business and whatnot, traveling a little bit, putting in work. But fiction is something that really grounds me, and I think the collection here is phenomenal. I need to work through them. But one of the stories, or you
Go
want to
ahead.
say?
No, I'm going to look at what stories the favorite stories are. But go ahead.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that your story is here.
Yeah.
And you are sort of published, but also sort of not published. And you're published in your comics,
Yes.
but you're not published in your writing.
No, but the comics were. I was very lucky. It was ended up with a big schwack of kind of Sunday funnies where it was
Right.
all color, tons of room. So I kind of did everything over the 10 years I had. I'd do poetry and then draw out the comic characters. Did that. It was script heavy, but it was really fun to try and fit it in with the illustrations.
Right.
But yeah, that if you consider a script being published, then yes. But no, the Ghostly Stallion is just for my own pleasure.
For your pleasure and also for my pleasure.
Yes.
Do you want to share a vignette of it, or you don't plan to publish that?
Oh, that'd be great. Do you mean tell you the story behind it, or?
Well, I don't want to give the whole thing away, but maybe give
Oh,
me
you mean just a part?
maybe give me the version of. So just for reference to our listeners, Tyler wrote the story. What was the name of it again? The
Ghostly Blue Stallion of Dorchester Cabin.
Yeah. So Tyler has this cabin in Alberta, and it's sort of in the middle of the woods, and expansive field of view, right?
It's a horror movie cabin, middle of nowhere,
Yeah.
and isolated. Yeah.
Yeah. And there happened to be this ghost or this being or this horse that should not have been there.
No, and not only that, it was a horse like I'd never seen before. I grew up
Right.
on a farm. I've seen thousands of horses,
Right.
and this was a blue roan,
Uh-huh.
which is basically, it was a stallion too. So it was this huge, gorgeous, muscular horse that was sort of the color of a blueberry. It's gray and blue, and it showed up on my property, and my property's completely fenced off. And yeah, as we tried to figure out where it was from, it had no markings or anything. And I won't give too much away. But what actually ended up happening was my friends had to leave, so I saw them leave, go back to the city. And this horse, which had sort of come running up to the cabin through this fog bank. I know it sounds dramatic, but it was pretty amazing. It then disappeared, and I followed its hoof prints right into the middle of a gloaming, and the footprints ended. Now, I'm sure it wasn't a ghost horse, but I tried to find it. I tried to find where the tracks picked up again, and I became quite worried in my head in the middle of this empty cabin, thinking it was a harbinger of some sort. So
Bringing in something impending,
yes,
probably doom.
Yes. I started picturing looking up at the window of the cabin and seeing its face pressed against the glass. And so I had to phone my friends that were driving back to Edmonton for some reassurance, because I had the hair on the back of my neck was standing up. But it was
Did the horse, like, I forget what it's called when a horse howls.
Neighs.
Yeah, neigh. Yeah, neighs. Did it neigh?
Yeah, it was. We thought it was talking to communicating with these other horses that were in a neighboring pasture, but the way it was challenging them, it makes a really aggressive noise. We realized that they weren't friends, that it wasn't with these horses. So it was being really aggressive with them, and it was just a very strange. Everything was just a bit off. It was really kind of interesting and creepy. But it was, anyways, when this happened, I walked directly from the forest where I couldn't find the horse, back to the cabin and sat down and wrote for, I think, 3 hours. And I've never done that before.
Just immediately. it
Yeah,
had to come
I
out.
just had to do it. Yeah. And everything in the story is true except for the very last line. No, actually, it's all true. I didn't add anything. In the story, the horse doesn't show up. I just imagine it showing up with its face pressed to the glass. So yeah, it was. It's kind of neat when that happens. I just got it all out, and I hardly change anything in the story.
So there's a couple things there. One is, did this happen? Did it not happen? People have to read the story, and make up their minds for themselves, I guess. The other thing is just the fact that these enigmas, sometimes they pop up out of nowhere, and then they disappear in the same way that they popped up, and they just leave you with this imprint. Maybe it's like an itch that it is impossible to scratch.
And I wouldn't change it for anything. Like
Right.
I actually do think we're all a little bit starved for something.
So
bigger than us.
is that an important facet of life, to experience these itches that we can't scratch and just accept them the way they are? Is there learning to come from it, or is it mystery for the sake of mystery?
For me, that what you just said, mystery for the sake of mystery.
Right.
I love that stuff.
Right.
I think we've talked about before. For me, if someone thinks they've got everything figured out, to my mind, that's where they're going to stop. Their brain calcifies. It's way more fun to be sort of scratching your head sometimes, because it keeps your brain
Right.
looking and listening, right?
And but I think that for the most part, people either ignore these mysteries as they arise in their life,
Yes.
or they get paralyzed by them.
Huh.
And the ones that, like, most people do have these events that take place in their lives. Sometimes they're tragic, sometimes they're just strictly enigmatic, and they're not necessarily joyful or sorrowful, and sometimes they are joyful, but then they become sorrowful the minute that they disappear, because the inherent part of it is that there's a beginning and end to this. I don't know too many perpetual mysteries that aren't just like the grand questions of life.
Yeah.
And it's almost up to us to figure out what we want to make of it. Right. So you can choose mystery for mystery, but other people will go on a lifelong crusade to find the answer.
What's funny too is, the guys that sit in my chair, they'll be telling me these stories, and I'll be blown out. While they're saying the story out loud, they'll realize what a strange or interesting or profound story it is, especially when they see my reaction to it.
Right.
Especially when someone's telling you something, you're going to be interpreting it through your own lens. And what I like is we'll ping pong things back and forth and get more out of it that way. I'm trying to think of an example, but I have to come back to me.
Yeah, it happens so often.
Yeah. It's funny. Some people just take that stuff and just push it away.
Yeah.
I get it. Like,
you have to, if you want to maintain that day-to-day equilibrium.
Yes, I was just going to say that.
It's going to knock you off your feet.
Yeah. And most people aren't, we're pattern-seeking creatures, right? We want to see the reason or the pattern in everything.
Right.
At least for myself, I've had too many unexpected tough stuff, or great stuff too, to sort of fool myself anymore that I have 100% control over my life.
Yeah.
So I kind of try to stay loose with the stuff that comes at me out of left field.
Right. So, there's a bit of stoicism involved in this, the things you can control, the things that you can't control, your circumstances. Your external world, you can't really control that. You can only control how you react to it. Right.
Yes.
And this comes back to like the Viktor Frankl Man's Search for Meaning and so on and so forth. I think people generally...
You've read that?
I've read like parts of it.
Yeah.
And I actually haven't finished it, but I sort of it didn't continue after the concentration camp.
Oh man, it's heavy.
Yeah, it's heavy.
But I will never forget. Yeah, I read that. I think it was in university. And you're right. I'm just thinking of what I took out of that. And he said basically, if you're in circumstances where, it's all out there and you have no say in it. Sometimes the best you can do, if I'm remembering it, what I took out of it, the best you can do is see how well you can do with what just hit you upside the head. That book was.
So the problem with that is you can take it and you can go as far back as Marcus Aurelius, and you can go even before Marcus Aurelius. You can go to, just drop any Greek philosopher and someone has an opinion on how to deal with, circumstance. So the issue is not dealing with tragedy per se or dealing with joy per se, knowing that both are fleeting. Like we know that, and this is a poem that I often quote, but it's Rudyard Kipling's if you can meet with triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same. So we know already, and even from books like the Bhagavad Gita, where it says, you must remain the same in both pain and joy, and you have the right to do work, but you don't have the right to the outcome of your work, and things like that, where it's getting it's getting you to play a game where you're playing the baseline game and not the, oh my God, this is amazing, oh my God, this sucks. You're playing the middle game, right? The problem is, I don't know that there's really an answer for the enigma game. Because an enigma is neither good nor bad. It's a why. It's like, why did this happen? What is the purpose of this? And I think that sometimes presents challenges to people that they don't really know what to do with. It's not a hooray, and it's not an oh no. It's just a what the fuck. And the what the fuck brings you into a totally different class of philosophers now. Because it's no longer just Marcus Aurelius cannot give you the answer to that. There you have to go through more treacherous paths.
What do you think is what would they have in common? Do you have any theory at all? What people that can handle that or take it on as a challenge rather than people that push it away?
Well, I think the people that go deep into it, many of them go insane.
Love it. Yeah.
I mean, this is true.
Yeah, no, we were talking on the phone earlier. The people that I know, and some of them are incredible people, but you can go down a rabbit hole. I would say there's people I know that have a good mix of common sense and kind of a philosopher's heart, but boy, I can think of cousins and myself at one point. You eat yourself, I know for myself, thinking I reached some plateau, and it crumbles away from me, and then you question everything. That's what I don't miss about my 20s. That was what my 20s were for me.
Yeah, so the question is like what to do about this, and there's a few different ways to go about it, and there's a few different fun quotes here. So one is Alan Watts has this little story where he says, well, imagine that, you could dream whatever dream you'd wanted to dream, and you first would be able to, live for 10,000 years. And then after you live for 10,000 years, you want to go and see every single planet, and you want to have every single experience, and you want to, marry the most beautiful woman and have the best job and make the most money and buy whatever car you want. And, every time you go through one of these iterations, you're getting basically exactly what you want. You're putting together your Hollywood production, and then poof, there you have it. He says, eventually you will start to tire from the certainty of controlling every aspect of these scenarios, and you'd probably end up in the exact life that you're in right now, where you don't know exactly what's going to happen. And I think what he's suggesting is that there's beauty in the unknown, but you have to have that discipline to know that you're dealing with the unknown, which is sort of like fighting the unknown is trying to put a fight against like the ocean or the sea. It's like it doesn't matter how hard you punch it, nothing's going to change it. And if anything, it's a Gordian knot where the more you try to unravel it, the deeper and deeper you drown. And so there's another line by Dante in his Divine Comedy in Paradiso, which is the third book. And in Paradiso, he enters like the final tier of heaven, and he's basically about to see God. And he does see God, but when he tries to describe it, he says, "This is a flight, and my wings are not capable of this flight." And I just thought that's such a beautiful line, because at some point you do hit a limit, you hit a bottleneck in this life where you just don't know. And you have to come to terms with that frustration that you don't know. And then I think that the only way to soothe yourself is through works of fiction, by seeing other people's enigmas.
There was, just as an aside, but I think it applies to it. There was a study done not too long ago that suggested, they found that what they found suggested that people that read fiction actually also score higher in empathy. And the theory was because you're putting yourself in other people's shoes. When you read, you're seeing them through those. So you actually get a little bit more practice in switching spots with other people. I you know, it's funny. Actually, some of the tougher times in my life, I can think, I actually escaped to books, which is very soothing. But then
you actually
escaped by reading.
Oh, you escaped with
yeah,
books.
Just it was a way to shut down, but at the same time, there was a balance, because I could either be shutting down, like just watching TV for 16 hours, or it would just take me to a better place than I was right then. And I would come back from a lot of those books with thoughts in my head that hadn't been there the previous day. I think when, for just speaking for myself, when I'm not feeling great for whatever reason, my thoughts get very slow. My energy gets really slow. And if you're reading a great story, it wakes you up again. Either the ideas that are coming at you, or you're really getting into a character, you're cheering for a character, or crossing your fingers for a character. And I've never actually thought of that until what you just said. I have primarily looked at escaping through nonfiction. It's kind of through fiction is a bad thing.
Right.
I've never really thought of that. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the empathy thing is real, because I know that for the first part of my 20s, maybe the first half of my 20s, I was addicted to nonfiction. I mean, I would frequently meet my entrepreneurial friends at the Indigo nonfiction section. We'd bump into each other there.
Adorable. That's
We wouldn't bump into each other in any other section.
Yeah.
It would be that section. And it's good. Like, it serves a purpose. You need to get skilled in certain areas of your life. You need to know the faults of your brain and the way you think, and different habits that you should uproot.
Or just honestly get introduced to a lot of ideas.
Yeah, exactly.
So you know what hats you want to try on.
Exactly. And most importantly, you know that you're this malleable being and you want to improve it. And it's important to get some sort of instruction, because they certainly don't give that instruction in high school. They probably give better education in elementary school than in high school when it comes to actually like the ability to formulate your own ideas.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Do you think about like imagination and creativity and problem solving? You're probably gaining more traction in elementary school than you are in high school, because high school is sort of force feeding you, where elementary school you might have more of this like innate curiosity that's being tapped into.
And you're also less worried about what everyone else thinks of you, like you are in high school or junior high.
Exactly. So you sort of need to supplement that after high school these days, until there's a change in the system. So that actually kind of works. The problem is, if you continue down that trajectory, you become surrounded by groups of assholes. Right? Like, truly, because you'll go to these, motivational circle jerks or whatever they are, and everyone doesn't admit their flaws.
They're reassuring each other how well they're doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was at an event not too long ago. My friend runs like business masterminds and wellness for entrepreneurs.
Yep.
And Actually, I'll give a shout out to Ian Call. He runs out in Squamish some really good meetups for entrepreneurs and people that want to prioritize their wellness and mental health, which I think is super important because the entrepreneurial life has been infected by the hustle culture of don't sleep, don't eat properly, whatever, just go work, make money, grind, sell to people, etc. And there's a time and place for that, but there's also a time and place to make sure that your brain is functioning properly and you're not, having just toxic thoughts, right?
Well, we only have so much mental real estate, right? And if you're putting it all in one plot of land, that, like I've said to you before, you're not necessarily the person I want to be talking to at a house party.
Yeah.
The conversation is going to be pretty narrow.
Exactly. So this wellness group, we had this meetup and it was great, and everyone was talking about their morning routine. Excuse me. So when it came to my turn, and everyone before me was like, I do this, I go for a morning dip in the river, and I eat this, and I drink that, and I go for a run, and I have all these non-negotiables. And I just said, fucking everything is negotiable. Like I don't have one. I used to have one, but I'm just at a stage right now where there's like too many options where you don't necessarily do anything. And I just admitted that I didn't have that. It's not that I'm not going to improve it or fix it.
Do you mind if I tell you I tell the story of when you first started sitting with me? That was 7 years ago now.
Okay.
So you were still kind of a pup,
Mm-hmm.
but right away, I think the first time you sat with me, you were telling me about the new translation of the Odyssey,
right?
And you're telling me your plans and stuff, which was pretty exciting to me because I am not that person. I have a ton of ideas, and it's tough for me to follow through on them. But charming guy, exciting to listen to, enjoyed your company. But then when you left, a coworker, Roland, you've sat with him. He's one of the smartest guys I've ever met. I really enjoy. Shout out to Roland, my old coworker, one of the best coworkers I ever had. When he left, I said to Roland, who was working beside me so we could hear the conversation, I said, Tamir's in that really sweet, really brief instant in time where he's got it figured out.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I really envy him, but the thing is we all had that space in our lives for like 6 months or 4 months or 2 years where we thought we could dictate the terms of our life, or we thought we got it all figured out, and then along comes the wrong girl, or along comes, your mom gets sick or something. And I said, he's got it all figured out right now, but and it's just it's just very interesting to hear you speaking now, and you've sort of realized, I'm not sure if this is, I'm kind of looking at it a different way from my own personal experience, but sort of you can do your half, and then you cross your fingers for the rest.
Yeah.
That's how I look at it.
Exactly.
And I think it's very like the people with their morning routines, that really does create a sense of security.
There's absolutely nothing wrong with it.
No.
It's just,
I wish I had more of that.
Yeah. It's just in fact, to continue to optimize yourself is a critical thing that we all have to do. The only issue is when you start lying to yourself.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Like for all of those people, everything is going perfectly and you do this every day. Okay, give me a break. Like, there's Navy SEALs and then there's basically everyone else.
Yeah.
Okay, for a reason, right? So like most days maybe you do it, and I think like routine helps a lot of people. Like if you have kids and you say I take my kids to school every day, then I'm sure you take your kids to school. Like there's obviously routine that's important. It's just it's for me, I value truth over this fake it till you make it.
When you were saying, I remember you were saying, sort of in some of the circles you move in, I've with customers that talk about they're in law or they're in banking, investment banking. Right. They say that too. The culture is very much what you were just saying. And these other guys I've talked to are like, I don't really know if I fit in with that. Even if they could have a lot more in common with these guys than they think, but they don't get to that point.
Yeah, you do have to play a certain role depending on the career that you're in. And I think the entrepreneurial career, you have, Gary Vaynerchuk, who's the the voice of of hustle culture on social media, and he says, between your 20s and 30, it's like between 20 and 30 years old, I didn't take a single day off. And then it's like, why the fuck not? Like, do you think you can just exchange your fun coupons for time now?
Yeah.
For your youthful 20s?
Yeah.
For I totally am 100% on board with dedicating yourself to a craft, but not because someone else told you to do it. If that is truly what you want to do, then by all means do it and go climb Mount Everest and make a name for yourself and be great in that thing that you want to be great at, because we know to be great at something does require intense sacrifice, right? But the problem that I see is a lot of people think that if they do all of those things and they just dump themselves into, or jump off a cliff and build the plane as they're coming down, a lot of times they don't build the plane and then they just crash. And so people should have an honest conversation with themselves to see what is actually important for you and how do you want to construct your life, but without the self-help, not self-help, but self-love nonsense. Because here's the other side of that. The other side is you don't hustle at all and you just pamper yourself all day long, and you're like, this is self-love, baby.
I have a version of that, except it's not pampering so much as wandering towards everything that interests me,
right,
and everything kind of interests me.
Right.
So for me, I need to get more onto a routine,
right,
so that I can actually go more deeply into the stuff that interests me rather than skimming along.
Right.
But I'm kind of seeing what you're saying though with the role just picking up a book. I think all of us, when we get into our lives, whether you're type E, type B, Republican, hippie, whatever, other doors, not because you even willfully do it, but every choice you make, steers you in one certain direction. When you sit down with a book, whether it's, The Odyssey or Shopaholic, whatever that chick flick was.
Confessions of a...
Thank you, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's going to, even if you're no longer moving those worlds, you're going to get either introduced to them or reminded of who you were. And you just have, even if you're on a certain track, you're going to continue to equate your brain with all these other worlds.
Right.
It's kind of what you were saying earlier, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, it's that, and that's the synthesizing of the yin and the yang. Right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. You know what's funny, Tamir? The last chapter in the book I made for you, Jews and Barbers.
Yeah.
Like I've read Isaac Bashevis Singer was he actually wrote in Yiddish, and it was translated to English, and all he wrote about was the pre-World War II Jewish communities in Russia or Czechoslovakia or Germany or wherever. Just probably like 17th century, 19th century, and I knew so much about traditional Jewish culture before I actually got to know Jewish people, because I grew up in rural Alberta. And that's the best example I can think of where actually I got immersed in a completely different culture, because I wasn't even raised, in a church, let alone any but, when I felt like when I met you or my neighbor, Lisa, who's Jewish, I actually had a bit of a starting point. Like I just had all these questions I could ask you guys, but they weren't, they weren't dumb questions. They were clarification. I remember I was telling you all the Jewish words I knew from reading schmuck, schmazel.
yeah. Schlemazel.
Schlemazel. Yeah.
Let's see. So we discussed a few things so far, and I think like the main point, just to recap, is there's a polarity here. You have fiction and you have nonfiction. You have the sublimated stories of the heart and the soul and life, with joyous and sorrowful threads sewn through them. And then you have the other side, which is nonfiction, which is how to actually take action with tools that exist through science, psychology, etc., to improve your life and whatnot. The problem is, if you just dedicate yourself to improving your life, you will quickly find out that you're just that Tamir 7 years ago sitting in the chair thinking that he can control everything just because he says he can. And then if you lean too much into the fictional world, you might be paralyzed in another sense because you're living in a fairy tale or
very interesting.
Dark fairy
That's
tale.
a really interesting summation, man, because that's, I would escape into fiction. You're right. So question for you.
Yeah.
What, you can learn from nonfiction. What, if you can think of any or clarify any, what has nonfiction taught you? Can you think of anything?
So many things. I mean,
some.
A book that I frequently reference, there's two books, they sort of go hand in hand, and maybe we'll add a third one in there. But this is sort of like the trinity for me in terms of my early 20s, even from the age of 19 to like 21. I inhaled these books and read them multiple times over. So the first one is The Master Key System by Charles Haanel. This was written in 1912. This was a course that was then turned into a book, and the course was meant to teach you how to gain. There's a line that says, if you want health, then get the health consciousness. If you want love, then get the love consciousness. If you want wealth,
sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Did I say nonfiction?
Yeah.
Shit.
You meant fiction?
Let me ask this question again.
Okay.
You can edit out the other one.
Okay.
So let me ask you a question. What has fiction taught you?
Right.
Like, if you you can think of some lessons. That's what I meant to say. I'm so sorry, man. The other one's easier.
I don't think I'm even gonna edit it out.
Yeah. Okay.
But just so let me just finish the thought. Then,
Yeah.
And then we'll go back. Because for the listeners, they are some interesting books. And I think those books actually led me to
1907.
1912.
1912. Wow.
Yeah. So Charles Haanel wrote The Master Key System in 1912, and that's a course on basically getting your mind right for first of all, in alignment with how the world works, which is a la Emerson's law of compensation. You do something good, you get something good, etc. Right? Because Emerson was very influenced by Eastern philosophies and so on. Actually, Emerson did a great job at combining Western and Eastern together, just in terms of his curiosities.
Which Emerson?
Ralph Waldo.
Ralph Waldo. Okay. Yeah. Gotcha.
So, like his essays on love and whatever, like we can go on and on about that, but that sort of inspired the generation, like the first generation of self-help novels, which was Charles Haanel's Master Key System, and it was a book about meditation as well. Like at the end of every chapter, the chapters are meant to be read and studied once per week, and said do not skip to chapter 2 until the second week. And it would give you these meditation exercises that were very weird meditation. It was like sit in front of a wall and stare at the wall, and then that's week 1. And then
especially for that time.
Then week 2, imagine a square on the wall. Week 3, identify all the thoughts in your head. Week 4, try to isolate to one specific thought. Suffice to say, it was difficult. Can't control my thoughts at 21 years of age, right? But that led me to Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. That was the next book, and I read that 6-7 times over. That book, and I'm sort of going over this sort of quickly because I want to get to the actual question that you want the answer to. But Think and Grow Rich is one of the, I think the bestseller, one of the top bestsellers of all time. For self-help and success and wealth creation and so on. And it's interesting because of this. It's the only self-help book that I know that talks about money that has an entire chapter dedicated to sex.
Potato, sometimes in this culture, right? In North America.
But it is so beautifully written that chapter eclipses all of the other chapters for me in that book. That chapter has a line that talks about past loves. It talks about how don't worry if you ruminate on past loves, for each love has its own unique characteristics and leaves its own indelible trace upon the heart. And if you feel lonely in future times, just dwell in the warmth of those previous loves and know that each of them are unique, and so on and so forth. And he just continues on.
I can think of a couple nonfiction books that were so poetic that I was just folding over corner after corner because I didn't want to write down the passage or keep the passage because of so much of just the idea behind it, but how they put it was so beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. There are a few, especially in that era. Like I think the writing was was less bound by precedent of the times.
Yep.
So they could just do whatever they wanted.
And that style was way more ornate too until Hemingway came along.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so then he writes another book. He writes a book called Outwitting the Devil, which is another one of my favorite books. And that book had a huge impact on me.
I've heard of that one.
I think I maybe mentioned it to you.
Yeah, maybe.
And so Outwitting the Devil is him in a very dark part of his life. He locks himself in a hotel for 2 weeks. He basically summons the devil. And he says to the reader, you can either believe that I interviewed the devil, or you can choose not to believe that I interviewed the devil. But for me, these words were real. And the devil, I listened to it as an audiobook as well. And the devil, what's interesting, has...
I got to read this.
Yeah, this is actually a fun one. The devil has this like very deep, majestic voice. And in fact, he even asks... he asks Napoleon Hill is the author, to refer to him as Your Majesty.
Okay.
And when he says, oh, well, if you're Your Majesty, then what's God? He says, God is, what you call God is what I call my opposition. And anyways, it's so beautifully written as well, and it's such an interesting interaction that had a huge impact on me. But again, you could take the devil and God aside. And
it's funny, though, Tamir, the nonfiction you read,
mm-hmm.
the two, three of them, all three that you've talked about, do sound also very poetic.
Exactly.
Metaphysical for nonfiction.
Those are the ones that stick with me.
Huh.
And if you want to add the fourth
Makes
one,
sense.
the fourth one is James Allen. He's an English philosopher, early 20th century, maybe late 19th century. And he was writing, he was writing a book, or he wrote a book called As a Man Thinketh. As a Man Thinketh is a line from, I think, either Psalms or Ecclesiastes. Not Psalms. Ecclesiastes or Proverbs by King Solomon. I can't remember which. And it's the full line is, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Basically, the secret nowadays, which is, whatever you think within, so is without. Whatever you want to manifest, it's all connected, right? And so he wrote beautiful poetic prose that used the metaphor of the mind as a garden, and basically whatever you sow will, cultivate whatever fruit, so on and so forth. So those are the nonfiction books that really like molded a lot of the, I guess, infrastructure and superhighways of my mind. And
so what's interesting, if I could interrupt here,
yeah,
when you're talking about the nonfiction books, you were talking about, you're describing them as almost like they were works of fiction, and you didn't really, you were talking about them like I'd ask you to describe your favorite fiction books and why they were beautiful.
Right.
And what's really interesting to me is I didn't hear too many things of what they actually taught you, more of how to, it's more how they were written impacted your overall.
Yeah, so that's a really good observation. I think that's what led me, that's what grabbed me at the beginning.
Okay.
Of course, there's the promise that there's going to be wealth and success and all of this fun stuff. And of course, there's a lot of like...
But you also hear, I mean, by the time you're 21, I'm sure you'd heard 101 different ways to accumulate wealth or to make your personality streamline.
Yeah.
But it was the... putting it in a, you jump in here.
Like an operating system for me. It had to be bespoke for me. Yeah, because others wouldn't get the job done.
Yeah.
But once I had that infrastructure in place, then I could start, building the rest of my city, right?
And it sounds like starting from there with sort of it giving you more of a more innate framework, you ended up in a slightly different place than the other people you were talking to at the entrepreneurs.
Perhaps. It's hard for me, obviously it's generalizing a lot, but I do know that I did read very many books that were sterile in that sense, and they were strictly, they're strictly about this psychological principle, strictly about this method to hook someone in for using sales tactics and blah, blah, blah.
You know what's interesting? The books I've flipped through, How to Win Friends and Influence People and 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and the classics. But I didn't read a lot of nonfiction or self-help until I was probably in my 30s.
Yeah.
And a lot of them, I was like, I know this already. And not because I'm so wise, but I think because the more basic was not money at all. I didn't read anything like that because it's not my jam. But I think a lot of the very simple stuff, if you get further on in life, you may have already, hopefully, learned it.
Yeah.
Not stuff that's not intuitive like money and math.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think funny story. I gave my dad a translated copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations in Hebrew. It's just easier for him to read it in Hebrew. And I remember he read like a couple chapters, and he's like, I already know all of this.
Yeah. Isn't that funny?
Why are you telling this?
Yeah.
I already know all of it.
Yeah.
I'm like, how do you like it? He's like, I don't know. It's okay.
What I have found is that, and definitely, like when I think of, like I read Man's Search for Meaning, the Viktor Frankl, the concentration camp, his concentration camp experiences. I think it was 2021, and that, holy cow, introduced a lot of ways of looking at the world that I hadn't thought of before.
Yeah.
Very useful for me.
Yeah.
But then it's interesting to read it 20 years later. I realized that the concepts weren't as new to me just because what your dad said. But what they did was, or my love of quotes, it clarifies or elaborates something you already know, but it clarifies it for you.
Yeah.
Are you ready to talk about
the fiction?
Yeah.
We sort of went through a little journey there.
We're both ADD.
Am
I allowed to
Yeah, you're allowed to admit that to the world.
So our conversations are tangential.
Let's fill this up before we get there. I wonder if it's still going to keep it warm.
Cast iron I've cooked with it a lot at the cabin. Right. It's very hard to heat up, but once it heats up, it keeps its heat forever. So it's, as far as cookware goes. So you know what, Tamir, you should do is put boiling water in these teacups to warm them up first, and they'll retain a ton of heat, and then the heat will stay hot. It's still warm.
Interesting. Yeah. I might go maybe I'm just going to go refill the water. Give me 1 second.
I'll do an ad.
What's that?
I'll do an ad.
Yeah, do an ad, please, for betterhelp.com.
Okay. I'm not sure what that is, but if you want better help, if you hire people that grew up on a farm, such as myself, we have very good work ethic. We know our help will be very specific. Like I know how to pull a calf if the cow's having trouble. But in most cases, like finances and taxes, I would not be better help for that. But if civilization collapses, I would have a lot of skill sets you could use, like animal husbandry. Okay, Tamir's back.
That's funny. I'm back for now, and then once the water is boiled, I'll do another quick stop. But all right, so where were we? We're talking about the fiction that has moved me. You want to restate the question?
No, I want to be more, just because it's random curiosity, not moved, because that's something we were talking about, self-help and nonfiction, right? People reading it for the purpose of gleaning information they can use to make their life, you know. What fiction has done that for you? But something like, wow, that is a lesson that character learned that I needed to learn or I needed to hear.
Wow, that's a really good question. Something that maybe I haven't thought about too much, because I feel that the learnings that come through are perhaps more unconscious. And I'm not necessarily like thinking about it, but just due to ruminating on the problems that they face within those stories, that helps me deal with my own problems. So as far as like a 1-for-1 character arc that lines up with me, it's hard to point to one particular instance, although maybe I can. So there's this book by, you could probably guess my favorite author.
Murakami Mira. Oh shit, you're covering up the name.
Haruki Murakami.
I panicked. I know the name. I panicked.
Tyler knows the name.
I do know the name. You've read
a bunch.
Tamir actually gave me Tamir. Jesus.
Yeah.
And I'm all rattled now.
I know.
Tamir's given me 2 of his books, and yeah, really interesting. Magic realism. To me.
Yeah. So you read 1Q84.
Yes.
And you also read
You gave me
Wind-Upper?
you gave me his novel that I'm working my way through of how to write novels.
Oh, The Novelist as a Vocation.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, but you've read I feel like you've read in the past. Oh, you've read some short stories.
Short stories. Yes.
Yeah.
The Elephant Disappears and a robbery one. Yeah.
Yeah, the second
The bread robbery.
bakery attack.
Bakery attack.
Yeah, the second bakery attack or something like that. So Murakami is, as all of my friends know, as all of the people in my life know, I think he's the GOAT as far as authors are concerned. Obviously, that's probably not true, and he probably wouldn't even agree to that. But for me, he's the GOAT. He's the person that where I picked up one of his books over the pandemic. And the pandemic, truly in 2020, early 2020, is when things changed for me because I joined a book club. And previously, I was slowly getting into fiction.
That's right.
Yeah, I was slowly getting into fiction because at the time I was still reading the Odyssey. I was still reading Ramayana. I was still reading Hermann Hesse, but like Siddhartha and little books like that. I was getting into it, but those are still philosophical classics, right? It's not something written in the last 20 years.
It's beautiful, but it's heavy going.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I picked up a Murakami book because I joined this book club specifically because I knew the people in the book club, but I knew these people are not reading these heavy, philosophical books that I'm reading. I needed some lighter stuff. Excuse me, because I knew that there was value in these so-called lighter books. They turn out to actually be heavier in many instances. But I knew there was value there, and I knew that the only way I'm going to be exposed to that is by joining a book club where I don't have control over the books that are being selected. And I think it was the second or third book where the name Haruki Murakami came up. And in fact, I actually read, by the way, one of my favorite writers in the world is Neil Strauss. I don't know if you're familiar with Neil Strauss. No. Neil Strauss is not a fiction writer. He writes for the Rolling Stones. And he also wrote the book called The Game. And The Game is a book about the pickup, the underground pickup world.
Yep.
And he also wrote a book years later called The Truth. And The Truth is a book that he wrote as an answer to The Game, which is what happens when you have a severe sex addiction and end up cheating on your girlfriend with her best friend.
I want to read this guy.
Yeah, which is exactly what he did.
Yeah.
And then he goes to sex addiction therapy, and the person that helps him out is Esther Perel, of renowned name. And she is phenomenal. And anyways.
And again, you're also dipping your toe into worlds that you've,
Yeah.
You're coming out of that with maybe new insight into.
Yeah, I mean, these are interesting books, but I would say that Neil Strauss recommended Haruki Murakami because he had this like virtual book club during the pandemic, and he recommended a book called Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World. Let me say that name again because it's a very unique name for a book.
That's one book. I thought you said 2 titles.
That's one book.
Okay.
It's called Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami. This book was written, I believe, in 1989. I could be wrong, but it was around that time. And this book, actually, for Haruki Murakami, he states that this book is his favorite out of his books. And so I just recommended, hey guys, or someone else in the group recommended Murakami. I said, oh, why don't we read this one? Because they weren't sure which of Murakami's books to read. I just saw Neil Strauss recommend it. I'm like, Neil Strauss is great. He probably knows his stuff. We ended up reading it. I decided to read it using audio because at that time during the pandemic, I wanted to get out of the house, going on these long walks, whatever. And the moment I finished the book, I remember just like there's when you listen to Audible audiobooks, it always ends like this. It's this old what do you call, like, I think it's like what do you call that Atlantic accent? Transatlantic accent.
Okay.
Right? She's like, Audible hopes you've enjoyed this message, or Audible hopes you've enjoyed this program. And so that ended. And then I'm like, now it's silence. Everybody knows the silence after finishing an audiobook. Yeah. And I thought to myself, holy fuck, I did not know a book could do that to me.
Nice.
And
This was Murakami?
this is Murakami.
One of my favorite feelings in the world
Yeah.
is stumbling across a singer or an author and realizing they just knock you on your ass, and you realize they have a whole back catalog that you now get to dive into.
That's the best feeling in the world.
It's the best feeling.
Yeah.
I remember, I moved here. I spent a summer here when I was 21, and I walked into not only was a CD store, there was secondhand CDs and cassette tapes.
Right.
And I bought a cassette tape of Ella Fitzgerald and
Right.
the one of Billie Holiday, and I put them on my cassette. This was 1993, people. So, but I just remember realizing, wow, they have dozens of albums. I'm gonna,
Yeah.
and for an author,
So many probably.
yeah, never mind. Lots. Yeah, it's a good feeling. Anyways,
So that's a bit of a tangent on Murakami, but to answer your question, which book is a book that I looked to, or at least I was able to pull from it some lessons that could be useful because there's some parallel in my life. And I found that the book Colorless, Tsukuru Tazaki and His Years of Pilgrimage, another long one.
Titles.
Colorless Tsukuru. Oh, I guess, okay, the listeners probably want to know, because I just left them on a cliff of Hardboiled Wonderland.
Yes.
So just a one sentence about Hardboiled Wonderland and the end of the world. Hardboiled Wonderland is storyline 1. The end of the world is storyline 2. The chapters interchange. So you go from one storyline to the other, and as you continue through the book, they intertwine.
Okay.
And they escalate as you get closer and closer to the climax. And there's two protagonists. One of the protagonists is in what you could call IRL, which is the new way of saying, in real life.
Yeah.
In that he's like a computer programmer, and there's this whole thing going on where, anyways, I'm not going to get too much into it, but he's this computer programmer. Things are going kind of in a messed up way. And, yeah, he needs to fix it. People are after him, blah, blah, blah. Then you have the end of the world, which is absolute batshit crazy world, totally surreal world, where you have a guy who goes to a library to decipher unicorn skulls.
Nice.
And he lives in a town that's like confined to a specific area, and there's just a bunch of unicorns that they extract their shadows from the unicorns.
This is Murakami.
This is Murakami.
Okay, I have to read this book.
This is his most.
on the
This
list.
is one of his most outlandish
Yeah.
books.
It just sounds, even
Yeah.
if for me it's not a 9 out of 9, it definitely will be an experience.
Yeah.
I think I've told you this, I would rather experience something that I've never quite seen the like of it before, even if it's like a 6 out of 10,
Yeah.
than see another romantic comedy that's 9 out of 10. But I would rather be exposed to the new interesting thing. That's just me.
Yeah, something that tickles a part of your brain
Yeah.
that doesn't normally get tickled.
Yeah. I was thinking, the reason I asked that question was when you brought up Man's First Search for Meaning, which I know is autobiographical, it's not
Yeah.
fiction, but that book taught, even though it's nonfiction, it taught me the same lesson that a lot of fiction has. Because a lot of fiction is dark, right? And for me, I had a great childhood, really, really unique, huge extended family. All my mom's side lived 20-minute drive one direction, all my dad's side 20 minutes the other direction. Great parents, but I was a kid in the closet. And when I was a kid, like, there was no one out, no one around on TV, what have you. So I was also living a very dark dual life. And I remember reading and just sort of as going through adulthood, I've always been too sentimental, not good with change, heart gets broken easily by friends, whoever else. And reading something like, basically I felt kind of locked in to a fate that was going to be not good, because people like me, how are they going to end up? Like, granted this was the 1980s, but
Right.
If you're a 16-year-old kid, it's not looking good. But so with Frankel's book, it was basically someone who was locked into a horrific fate, but he found something redemptive in it despite that.
Right.
And a lot of fiction you read, it's the same thing, because there has to be some kind of conflict. And some of those short stories books, they get tough. But even if there's not a happy ending, there's always something that I could take out of it. Like, wow, they're not super happy or they're in a tough spot, but they're still getting a kick out of a colorful, just basically I was taking lessons out of it of how to get through when the best I could do was just dog paddle, keep my head above water. And it even actually just taught me sometimes that's good enough.
Yeah.
Because sooner or later, something's going to shift.
It'll come around.
Yeah. And it's funny to think.
So those gave you the lessons rather than someone tell you, hey, things will come around. You got to learn that on your own by proxy.
Because I wouldn't, who are you going to tell? Even as an adult, like with your entrepreneur mixer. You're presenting everything's really great, fantastic, and it's a feeling of shame to even as an adult say like I'm lonely or I don't know where I'm going next or I'm Johnny No Friends. But for me, fiction was always like, even if it was a downer, the fiction in fiction the conflict has to be resolved to some point, and that's where I would draw my lessons from.
Right.
Either. Even if they're locked in, a factory job and single mother of 7, they would find some way at the end of the book, even if it sometimes ended badly, but they would find the conflict in the author resolving the conflict. Usually there was something there I could take away from that. That would be my answer to that. I know when I come across something in a fiction that I really like, that there is, for me, an explicit lesson in it, I usually write that passage down in my journal. Yes, I keep a journal. That is, a diary is feelings, a journal is thoughts. So I'm not threatened. My masculinity is not threatened by saying I keep a journal.
Not at all. Journal is...
I know. I'm a different generation. But yeah.
You're keeping a journal, not a diary.
No, it's not. And it's very important that I stress this.
Yes.
But I was just thinking, if I went back through there, I write something down. If I wanted to think of what fiction has actually taught me or made me look at the world in a different way, those passages I've written down are explicit lessons or explicit ideas of how to look at the world that would broaden my own life. Interesting. I should be writing this stuff down.
Dude, you're doing great.
Oh wait, we're recording it.
You're doing great.
Yeah.
For the first podcast.
Yes,
this is awesome.
Forgot. Yeah, I eventually forgot. That's interesting.
So I guess you sort of answered the question that you asked for yourself. Or you asked me which fiction book, but you're talking about how fiction books already have given you lessons. And
I'm trying to think of explicit ones. That's more of a...
That's kind of hard.
It's a different than a nonfiction lesson, which is, always invest in 4-2Ks or, do 10 jumping jacks when you get out of bed or...
Exactly. That's exactly right. So just to, I guess, tie up the last thread of, or the one that you asked me with respect to... which book? So Colorless Takuro Tazaki and his Years of Pilgrimage. So let's break down the name for a second. Colorless Takuro Tazaki. So Takuro Tazaki is the name of the protagonist.
Yep.
They call him colorless because he has 4 friends and they represent sort of like a palm. Okay. And actually the front cover of the book sort of uses that as a visual metaphor. Each one of his 4 friends' names is named after a color.
Okay.
His name, his translation of his name, means colorless.
Okay.
So colorless can sort of mean anything. It's sort of like this Zen Buddhist concept. It's
okay,
because nothing or no thing.
In our immediate culture, that's it's hard to take much out of that that's positive.
Yeah, I mean, like color, like black is colorless, white is colorless.
Yeah. I was just thinking. I was thinking it's like beige. It's
right,
bland. But in other cultures, it would be.
Yeah, I think it's more of like emptiness, but I think there's room for interpretation there, especially considering these books that I read, they're translations of the Japanese. Yeah. So, he's amazing. Like he has these amazing friends, and each one of them fills a role in their friendship. And they live in this rural part of Japan. And Takuro Tazaki, he finds himself accepted to a top university in Tokyo. And so at 18, he goes to Tokyo, and none of his friends do. His friends stay for the local college and kind of, poke fun at him for wanting to go to this bigger university and, trying to make something of himself.
Yeah.
Well, one semester passes, he comes back. His friends are nowhere to be found. The phone numbers don't connect anymore. Nobody answers. When he does finally connect to someone, they say, "Oh, sorry, we can't talk right now." Out of nowhere, over the course of 3 or 4 months, when he comes home, he leaves in the summer, he comes home in Christmas, and he no longer has these lifelong friends.
Okay.
He is obviously depressed by this.
Now, have they disappeared or they've ghosted him?
They've ghosted him.
Okay.
They're there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, sorry. We're talking about how that's one of the things that
Yes.
books help me with, actually. Because that happens to everyone.
Ghosting, the
yeah,
capital.
and you're like, what happened?
The capital offense.
Yeah, like what happened?
soul.
Is it me? Is it they're crazy? Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Anyways,
and especially it's one thing within a romantic
Yes.
relationship or situationship or whatever.
Because they're more volatile.
Yeah, it's more volatile, and it's also like, okay, well, you can almost rationalize it. You're like, oh, he used me for sex, or she used me for sex, or we both used each other, blah blah blah. It was, you could sort of rationalize, but with friends, it's very difficult to rationalize it with friends.
Yeah, it's supposed to be gentler. And plus, if I may, we're taught in Western culture, the younger generations who are, I think boomers and older, bought into the soulmate thing. We sort of are supposed to be generally savvy enough not to longer buy into the soulmate thing.
Right.
But I think we're still taught, at least speaking for myself, we're still taught, and I completely bought into it one level, the whole thing that kids programs teach us, which is friends forever. I think people still believe that if you don't have the what you just said, the 5 different friends that fill a role for each aspect of you, that's what you're supposed to have.
And then what happens when you have it? Then it disappears.
Speaking personally, crushed.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, I about 3 years ago, I mean, we talked about this. I don't talk about it anymore because I'm better, but yeah, I had 3 of my nearest and dearest all do it, and it was very bewildering. I know I've figured it out now, but at the time I was too hurt and confused to make any sense of it. So anyways, I want to hear how this ends up. Maybe I can.
Well, this
does he get revenge? Because then I'd learn how to get those guys. No, just kidding.
He obviously like anyone in that position wants answers, and immediately he seeks in the acute situation, in the short term. That's when things are hottest. That's when you could probably get an answer. But as time goes on, the probability of getting an answer decreases more and more and more. The opening line of the book goes something along the lines of, in his sophomore year of college, all Tsukuru Tazaki could think about was dying because he was so depressed. And it starts in a very dark place, and then it paints a picture for you. But I mean, they fast forward. He doesn't hear anything for I think till they're in their early 30s. So 20 years has 20 years or 10 years, something between 10 and 20 years. I can't remember. And he then decides, he talks to someone. He then decides, I need to go find these friends and figure out what the fuck happened, because it's eating him up inside. And see, that's tying back to what we talked about earlier, where you have these enigmas that happen to you. You either let it go, or
interesting. Okay.
they start eating you.
I was thinking more big picture, but you're just talking like the baffling aspects of everyday life too.
It could be either, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But I never thought.
Big picture is whatever. Like, okay, where are we relative to the Andromeda galaxy?
Yeah. I didn't take it on all levels.
Oh yeah, and listen, what are you more attached to? Are you more attached to your friends, or are you more attached to the black hole in the center of our galaxy? Like, what makes more? That's abstract. These are like abstract enigmas. Why does the U.S. only have a left and right wing party?
Yeah.
These are mysteries of the universe.
It's what's so funny is often we were talking about Stoicism at the beginning, or things like that. I'm very zen about things I don't have control over. Very zen, bad health news, things like that. I can roll with it. But if someone does something that I can't understand,
Right.
as in I would never do that.
Yes.
Yes, those enigmas. Why would someone act like that? Why are there so many? Why do assholes get ahead in the world? Things like that. That, yes, can spin someone out.
So
Absolutely.
I'm going to finish the story,
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
before that, I'm going to quickly pour the last batch of water.
I'm good.
You're good?
Water. Yes, fresh water. Yes, absolutely.
Oh, you want fresh water?
No. I thought you were getting me more tea.
You don't want more tea. Okay. I'm going to get a glass of water.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I like to be hospitable on this show.
Yep. As long as I don't have to go pee, I have to just pace myself. Let's see. Let's do another ad. No, I hit the wall. This is the other book I made. Tamir, The Horror Hall of Fame. And it's got a cat. Anyways. Oh, I didn't make him. I lent this to him. Anyways. But you have to see it to actually see what the fuss is about. Because it just looks like paper.
Maybe we'll do like 15 more minutes and then call it.
Sure.
Something like that. Otherwise, we'll carry on forever. We've done an hour 17 minutes so far.
Wow, really? Huh.
So that'll make it around an hour and a half, and I think that'll be solid. So okay, we got our water. We're set. We are.
So I want to hear what happens with these bastard friends.
These bastard friends.
Sorry, I'm projecting.
But the thing is that everybody thinks they're right in these situations.
Yes, hence the enigma.
Yes.
Why are we talking about this? This is literally was my life until about 2 years, until a year and a half, 2 years ago.
It's very frustrating.
It's very strange when you think you're the victim, and the other person thinks so too. And that's a tough skill to learn, to actually be able to get through that without being embittered or something like that.
Yeah, you have to decide. I mean, is this person a friend? Are they an ally or are they an enemy? And I think there's this tendency nowadays to just write off people. Mm-hmm. And they think, and this is something that really troubles me, where people think they're making progress in their life because they're cutting people out of their life. This is not progress.
Oh, that's interesting.
This is taking problems, and this is the equivalent of Joe Pesci digging a hole in the desert and putting a body in there. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
You can't confront it.
Yeah.
So you kill it, and then you go bury it somewhere.
And if I may,
and you hope the police don't find it.
Yeah. And I'm just speaking from my own experience. And when that happens in a relationship, not only does the other person not get any answers or closure, you're not really learning anything from it yourself. Like at the very minimum, it's so many people, they'll deal with conflict by just cutting and running, but think that they're doing something right because they feel they're the victim.
Yeah. But
you're also not learning how to deal with this tough stuff. And it is way, I'm only saying, like, I know I have purposely tried, like, roommates. I learned from Roland, to go coworker, have roommate meetings once a month. And literally my purpose isn't to find out what color they want to paint the bedroom, but it's to practice getting this shit out and try to be good at it, because I'm a typical Canadian. I'll be like, it's fine, I can handle it. And then 6 months later, I flip out on the person.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I think people need to practice this more. I've made a personal pact with myself that I would never do that to someone. And we see this done egregiously.
Yeah, we do.
With the closest of friends. We see it done egregiously with family members. And listen, there's a point where you've tried the conversation route and the conversation route doesn't work. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about an entire bypass of the conversation to protect yourself and calling it progress and calling it improvement. You have to face the music at some point. Otherwise, as the Hindus say, you're going to face it in the next life.
Yeah.
At some point in the future, you're going to face it. And if it's not now, it'll be another time. So,
And the thing is, if not now, this is going to, say you're 20 or 30 and you're doing this, there's going to become a time where you've got kids, you've got a marriage. And if that's your habit,
yeah.
There's nowhere you can, you can't keep doing that when the consequences get bigger as your career goes forward, all that.
Yeah. So
Interesting.
So that's why when I think I mentioned this to you, and I have conversations with people sometimes, and they ask me what would be your superpower, and a lot of people say, well, I want an invisibility cloak, and I want to fly, and I want infinite money, and blah blah blah.
What did you say?
I said I want the power of an emperor to summon anyone that I wish from the kingdom.
Oh, to end the enigmas.
The equivalent of a subpoena.
Yeah.
The subpoena of the soul.
It's funny though. A lot of answers to that question. Why did like your character in that book? What happened to everyone? The simplest answer is the one that's obvious. It might even be a big deal, but cutting and running is easier than having
facing it.
Yeah, it's not that you did something horrific.
No,
just that's their response.
Yeah.
Just like a lot of people, if a relationship ends, they can't stay. Yeah,
they can't stay as friends.
If you're an ex, yeah, they're not even friendly. If you're an ex, you are strictly a relationship, and
well, and listen, and that. I think if there are typically in that, again, it's okay to cut people off after they've had their day in court.
Yes, big difference.
But it's another thing to go and just execute someone willy-nilly.
What's funny though is the any quality taken too far is negative. I was the opposite, and it was also causing trouble. Growing up in a small community, you couldn't really cut people off. They were going to be at your cousin's wedding. They were going to be at school the next day. They were going to be everywhere. So I came into the wider world extremely loyal and extremely sentimental, and it slaughtered me because I was not willing to cut anyone loose. So somewhere in the middle.
The middle way, wu way, as the Taoists say. But about this book, the second part is the pilgrimage.
Okay.
And
going to find the friends.
Going to find the friends.
Okay.
After so many years and figuring out why. And it turns out, and each of them tell them their experience and their perception of how things went, and they all have an alibi. They all have something that you could justify. And
everybody has it. Everyone's life makes sense to them.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And even if they know that they screwed him over in a sense, it was justified.
Mm-hmm.
And it was okay. And the jealousy was there, and the blame was there, and he became a scapegoat. And that's we really need to understand the term scapegoat is attaching your problems onto someone else. Attaching your problems onto someone else, and then you go and you kill that fucking goat.
They're the cause of it. Yeah.
And that's from the Bible.
Yeah. Because
you'd attach your sins onto this goat, and then you'd kill it. And it's like people don't realize that they're doing that day in, day out. And then they have the audacity to call it progress. And so when we're faced with these situations, of course, this podcast is not about teaching people how to take responsibility. There's many other podcasts about that.
Yes.
This podcast is about what to do when you're on the other end of it. And you have to make a decision, Tyler. You either have to go on the pilgrimage, or you ignore the pilgrimage and you just write it off as, hey, these people don't want to hang. I guess we're not going to hang. And you swallow that bitter pill and you move on. What's difficult is the decision of which pathway to take. Do you want to find the answer? Are you okay not having the answer?
I wasn't, and I'm not okay. But I found a way. Basically, as you can probably tell, I spent a lot of energy on that because one of my biggest fears, especially when I found out I was ADD, is there's something about me that's too much. There's something about me that's causing people to act this way. So I kind of was, like you said, I was circling around and around it. And finally, what we were just talking about is what smoothed me out.
Right.
Is just realizing everybody has a justification. Anger is its own justification. It isn't necessarily something one person always did. It's just, unfortunately, and not how we're taught as kids, it's kind of how a lot of things go.
Yeah.
Even if other person's reason doesn't make sense.
So how much of this absurdity is related to, because you were mentioning Franz Kafka earlier.
Yep.
Is there some parallel between these topics and Kafka's view of absurdity?
Oh, he descended into madness, I would say. Still functional, but barely. Yeah, I think the way, especially in the letter he wrote to his father crippled any ability for him to look at himself without wincing, because he'd been convinced that he was all these things.
Right.
But at least he turned it to his art. And he said, the one thing he said was that the one thing that people are puzzled about him is that when he is in his world where he's writing out all this pain, it's his special species of happiness. And even though he looks sad and 1,000 miles away and people don't understand what's going on with him, that's actually closest he comes to happiness, is when he's turning his pain into art. I don't think he's really figuring, at least until the end of his life, he wasn't really figuring it out, but at least he was getting it out on paper, and luckily it was beautiful. If anything, the only thing that Kafka made me feel was extremely lucky that I stumbled upon being curious or hurt or intrigued enough to try to figure it out. I think Kafka got beat down and folded, but he also left some beautiful writing because he had that in him.
Right.
That's what it made me think. Yeah. So, and yeah, his pain was beautiful. Really dark, crazy stories, but that's my answer. I'll leave it right there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting how these dark stories give us the more profound lessons. It's weird. I find that when it comes to music, most songs, and I mentioned this on other platforms I've been on, but most songs are about love or heartbreak or sex. Yeah. It's like that trinity
or
of
partying.
But partying with it's like a means to an end.
Yeah.
And with these really good books, they're not necessarily about that, but they're about this like darkness for one reason or another. And like a lot of the great books have this like darkness in them somehow.
The ones that I find drawn to darkness, but it's also, if you look for it, you can also see the really black humor, like even Kafka.
Sure, yeah.
Which it just, for me, it taught me.
Well, that makes it palatable.
It taught me to kind of like laugh while my feet are on fire.
Yeah.
Which is really, you kind of have to, my opinion. I always have to say that as a barber. It's my opinion. Like if you can laugh, the transition from comedy or tragedy to comedy, one thing I love about as I'm getting older is the transition time gets shorter and shorter. Something really shitty happens, and the next day, like you've experienced, the next day I'm telling a customer and it's already a funny story. Whereas I think until I learned some of these lessons, it was like friggin' a year or 6 months or 2 years before you could make a good story out of it.
So that reminds me of Alan Watts's lecture on the Joker or the jester, court jester back in the day. We don't have court jesters anymore. We have stand-up comedians, but you have the king and then you have the court jester. And people have asked, well, why was there a court jester in such a royal environment? And the reason was the court jester was there to remind the king of his own mortality, and that things aren't necessarily as they seem. And so what you're suggesting is potentially as you get older, perhaps wiser, the jester and the king, our internal jester and king, start to become closer and closer into one.
The people I know, because you're drawn to certain experiences that I share with other people that we found that's a great survival strategy,
Right.
whether it's because of bad health or addiction or whatever.
Right.
I was gonna say too, everyone has a reason for what they do. Cutting people loose. That's also why I think maybe that also parallels why anger is such a ready option these days. Because when you're angry, you don't have to think, and you don't have to admit fault, and you don't have to, the self-righteousness.
It's an easy exit off the highway.
Yeah. You're a dick, so I have to deal with you.
Goodbye.
Yep.
Interesting. Well, I guess we should wrap, because we've gone through some really interesting, heavy, important subjects, and I think this is an amazing inaugural episode so far of the Nectar of Time.
Yeah, that was interesting. I had no idea. It's interesting because you're definitely an idea fellow. I'm more immediately default to my own experiences because I've had a weird life.
Yeah. Well, sure, but that's part of you being a guest on the show.
Yeah. Well, thanks. But yeah, whereas you are like, not. I do not mean this.
Yeah.
But you're drinking everything in because you're the kind of guy that is interested. Everything, you want to look behind the curtain with almost everything, which is fantastic. And I still am
boon
too.
And a curse.
But often my experience hits first, and then the reflection of the idea. So it's interesting to see the difference.
Yeah, it was an awesome conversation,
it was fun,
Tyler.
man.
Really appreciate having you on. And I was going to say, is there anywhere is there any place that people can follow you? But you're off social media.
No.
Oh, you're on social media?
You know what? One day I have to get my website for my comic strip back up, and it is very much wacky, interesting, dark stuff like this.
Okay.
It is a shame that it's not up right now because
it's okay.
It would be fun to set
listen,
it.
when it's ready, we'll just add a link, even retroactively. So.
Yes, and if I may say, Tamir has sat with me for 7 years now. He's never bored me for a minute. This is an interesting cat. So
Until today. Just kidding.
So yeah, I think if this is the first podcast for this, you guys could probably expect some food for thought. Oh, why did I use a cliche there?
Damn.
Yeah.
How dare you?
I better cut out while I'm still here. Anyways, yeah. I'm going to be listening to this.
We'll do it again another time.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you.
See you, man.
Yeah. Good night.